This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Ateli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Stocks surge in East Asia as US President Donald Trump pauses tariffs for most nations, but not China. While Beijing slams Washington for destabilizing the global economy, but still hopes to meet the Americans halfway. Meantime, China eyes stronger ties with Southeast Asia, hit hard by tariffs before the pause. Malaysia, ASEAN's current chair, holds talks with Beijing and prepares to host Xi Jinping next week. Now, Beijing hits out at claims by Ukraine's leader that 155 Chinese nationals are fighting for Russia, urging Kyiv to recognize Beijing's push for a political solution to the conflict. And South Korea's perceived presidential frontrunner, Lee Jae-myung, enters the leadership race, pledging to address economic inequality. Ex-ruling party head Han Dong-hoon also joins the fray, with the election set for June 3rd. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, NATO chief Mark Rutte wraps up his first visit to Japan. As global tensions worsen, we get an expert's take on just how Indo-Pacific security matters to the Euro-Atlantic alliance. And we'll also be telling you about a potential minerals for security pact between US and the DRC in Africa, one that could see the US reduce its reliance on China for rare earths, the critical minerals that go into everything from mobile phones to high-tech weapons. A slight reprieve in the global trading order after US President Donald Trump hit pause in his tariff assault on trading partners. Higher so-called reciprocal tariffs that just came into effect yesterday were dialed back for most countries except China. Instead, Mr. Trump jacked up tariffs on Chinese goods even further to 125%. Now, that's against China's 84% rate on American imports, which comes into effect today.
中方不愿打，但也不怕打。我们绝不会坐视中国人民的正当权益被剥夺，绝不会坐视国际经贸规则和多边贸易体制被破坏。如果美方执意打关税战、贸易战，中方必将奉陪到底。
Now, the Commerce Ministry accuses Washington of violating the rights of Chinese firms and destabilizing the global economy, but it says it's still hoping to meet the US halfway. Mr. Trump, meanwhile, told reporters he does not think he will raise tariffs on China any further.
I think that President Xi is a man who knows exactly what has to be done. He's a very smart man. He loves his country. I know that for a fact. I know him very well. And I think he's going to want to get to a deal. I think that's going to happen. We'll get a phone call at some point, and it'll be off to the races. It'll be a great thing for them. It'll be a great thing for us. It's going to be a great thing for the world and for humanity.
And for more analysis, we are joined now by Haron Lim, Assistant Director and Economist at Moody's Analytics, and CNA's Beijing correspondent Olivia Xiong. Well, thank you both for joining us in our studio today. First to you, Haron, we heard there what Mr. Trump said, that he's not going to be jacking up any more tariffs for China. So what do you see as China's next move in this tariff war?
So I believe that China will be holding its own guns at this stage. That seems to be the more likely outcome. If they will have retaliated, they will have done so by now. Of course, there still remains the possibility that they will retaliate. But I do think that the pause is more plausible at this stage because they are looking to assess just how much the tit for tat could occur if they again move in to retaliate. I believe the US may again raise tariffs in such a situation. So it is not likely that the Chinese will raise the tariffs at this point.
So, you know, it has sort of turned things all topsy-turvy, you know, in the last 2 days. And Olivia, I know you've been tracking a lot of sentiment on the ground and online. What are some of the latest lines or people saying about?
I'll tell you, throughout this whole past week, if you look at Chinese social media, you will see that on the trending list are many topics related to these developments that we've seen unfold with this escalating trade war in the last few days. Some netizens expressing support for China's decision, saying that these strong measures are necessary to defend China's interests. Some are also saying that, yes, China is ready for a fight. It has been through the trade war in the first Trump administration, and it's now prepared to do this. There are also some who are calling on other Chinese to buy more goods locally to boost domestic consumption to replace the loss that may come from this trade war. But the big question also is what's happening with businesses. Just anecdotally, I was speaking to a bar that imports alcohol, including from the US, and they were saying that they are not too worried at the moment because they are not feeling the price increase just yet. But even they say if the price goes up, they say that there are alternatives that they can turn to domestically as well. And the American Chamber of Commerce, in a note to its members, and we have that here, and our team will pull it up, it says that it's closely monitoring this latest escalation, adding that while some forms of tariffs can address specific concerns, these sweeping duties create a high degree of uncertainty for businesses and consumers, and that this level of upheaval is unprecedented, calling for China and the US to prioritize dialogue and work towards long-term solutions. So a lot of chaos going on and people waiting for the dust to settle.
As you've mentioned, the upheaval is unprecedented. So Heron here, this is bruising trade war that's been going on. In terms of the fallout, in tangible terms, what would it be like for China? And there's also talk about companies, moving their investments out of the country or even jobs.
So what we see as more immediate fallout is definitely on the exporter sides, where the exporters of China is definitely seeing less orders from the US. And with regards to that, then that immediately reduces a lot of the demand for the Chinese aggregate economy. And with that concern, then there is concerns that because of the lack of revenue and therefore with all the overheads that these companies incur, they may go into insolvency, bankruptcy, and that could have a cascading effect on what is already what we see as a sluggish economy in China. So that definitely is concerns over there, but there is also the sense that these companies with sufficient reserves that they have potentially could be moving ahead to overseas, to offshore, to other countries, particularly those in ASEAN.
Heron, though, we are seeing reports that the Chinese leadership is set to meet to discuss further stimulus to address this escalating trade war, touching on areas like housing, as well as consumer spending, technological innovation. Does it signal that we are past the point that China has prepared for?
I do think so. Right now, we are seeing tariffs more than double from what Trump has initially promised would be the case of 60% during the campaign trail, and 125% is definitely more than double. Right? So in that sense, I think the calibration of what they did for hitting what they have termed as a 5% growth target for 2025, those calibration of what they did in the fiscal space, in the monetary space, it's now out of the window, and they have to go in to recalibrate and see whether these measures need to be increase in magnitude to support the economy moving ahead. And in the worst case scenario, I do foresee them potentially dropping the growth target as a kind of a last resort, if you would.
And you were talking here and there about all this recalibration going on, Ollie, and these other countries except China, there's been a pause on these duties around the tariffs. So what is going to be their next strategy, their recalibration? What is it going to look like?
Yeah, Heron was talking about the stimulus measures that could come in, but another big picture here, another big puzzle piece here is on the diplomatic front, right? China has been sending out a clear signal that it intends to boost its relationships with other countries, and we saw Chinese President Xi Jinping in his first remarks since this trade row escalated, talking about strengthening ties with neighbors. Malaysia confirmed that President Xi will be visiting next week. We also know there are reports that he's likely to visit Vietnam and Cambodia. And analysts I've spoken to say that China will likely be wanting to present itself as a credible partner compared to the US. And this is something that we heard today from the Foreign Ministry. Have a listen.
采取必要的反制措施，反对美国的霸凌行径，既是为了维护自身的主权、安全、发展利益， 也是为了维护国际公平正义，维护多边贸易体制，维护国际社会的共同利益。得道多助，失道寡助。美国的倒行逆施，不得人心，终将以失败告终。
I'll tell you though, the response from other countries to China's call to build stronger ties has been relatively mixed. If you recall, Australia turned down China's appeal to, quote, join hands to defend trade. We also saw a Chinese official call on India to stand together against US abuse of tariffs. But, the Communist Party-linked paper, the Global Times, hit back at the Indian Commerce Minister, which called these US tariffs as, quote, an opportunity of a lifetime. And we also saw the US Commerce Secretary also saying that for countries that are thinking about being closer with China, that is akin to, quote, cutting your own throat. And we know that Spain's Prime Minister is visiting Beijing tomorrow, and he has been one that has called for Europe to align more closely with China. But Harren, though, with all that's happening on the diplomatic front, we know there's going to be a ripple effect on supply chains, including in Southeast Asia, where President Xi is expected to visit. What new strategies could firms adopt to deal with the only certainty that is uncertainty, right?
So at this stage, I think it is clear that firms truly dislike uncertainty between the investors, firms, even consumers themselves. They really detest the idea of uncertainty because it just throws away a lot of the plans that they could have and for long-term planning. And when it comes to things like opening new factories, making new investments, the certainty is what they crave rather than the volatility that we are seeing right now. So in terms of strategy, definitely going back to some of the tried and tested methods is about diversification, is about going to like-minded partners on the more neutral partners that both sides, like both China and the US, see as relatively neutral partners, and to really tie on them on areas of regionalization, but also things like, for instance, in ASEAN, we see regionalization, but also with the CPTPP partners, I think we do definitely see a lot more efforts being done on that end to increase support by the governments. And I do think that that will present some opportunities for firms that are agile enough to look into these markets.
And Harren, we reported earlier, based on what China is saying, despite all this tit-for-tat tariffs, they're still willing to meet the US halfway. There was talk some weeks back where, President Xi also was supposed to go to the US, or they were supposed to meet. Under what conditions do you think talks could actually take place, or is it wishful thinking at this point?
So it looks at the heat of the moment that it could be wishful thinking, but I do think that when time passes, we will see economic pressure start to ratchet up and lead both sides to come to the negotiating table. But the negotiation table may require a neutral third party to come in to kind of mediate between both sides, a trusted broker, if you would. So I potentially see, for instance, Singapore or even, say, Switzerland that could potentially be those brokers to seek to get the both sides to the negotiation table, do negotiations, and they may not come to an immediate agreement and a kumbaya situation, if you would, but I do see the potential for them to at least come up with preliminary agreements and potentially leaving these tariffs of reciprocal tariffs at least at a lower level rather than the heightened levels that we're seeing today.
Okay, we'll certainly be keeping an eye out on that. Thank you so very much for coming into our studio today. Harren Lim, Assistant Director and Economist at Moody's Analytics, and of course CNA's Beijing correspondent Lee Jae-myung. Now, a 90-day pause on new US tariffs has been broadly welcomed across the region, offering a temporary breather in an otherwise tense trade environment. But economies are staying cautious, using this window to review plans and prepare for what may come next. So Japan, for instance, responded swiftly to the pause, calling it a positive step. But Tokyo isn't letting up. It's demanding the US review existing levies on steel, aluminum, vehicles, and auto parts. Now, those tariffs, some as high as 25%, are still biting hard. South Korea also showing cautious optimism. Its trade minister said the pause gives room for negotiation. Mr. Chung In-kyo has met U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer in Washington this week to push for lower rates. And Seoul is hoping to shield its export-heavy economy and continue dialogue to minimize the impact of the tariffs. Taiwan says the extra 90 days gives a breathing room for more detailed discussions on trade and economic cooperation with the U.S. Its foreign minister says the island wants to take full advantage of the American market. Hong Kong, meanwhile, is going even further. Finance Secretary Paul Chan slammed the tariffs as fundamentally wrong, warning they disrupt global supply chains and could even tip the world into recession. He stressed that China has the tools to respond and that intimidation won't work. We're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, details on the relief rally on East Asian financial markets after Donald Trump's 90-day pause on his crippling tariffs. Plus, the fallout from the trade war also sending global bond markets on a wild run. More on what happened there next.
How to get the job you want.
Following your passion is the worst career advice.
And tips to stay ahead in the workplace.
Even for the young people out there, it's time to really look at upskilling.
If you're not learning, you're not growing.
Money Mind, Saturday on CNA.
Attention inmates, proceed for your yard now.
Not many people exercise. Usually, that's the only time we can freely gossip.
This pouch consists of a lot of stationeries that I have to use.
Looks very cool, right?
I wish I could tell everyone this.
This shampoo got nice sweet smell. We can only buy with our pay. I use it as perfume also.
I got no way to vent out my stress.
Sandy open 736.
Joanna, what have you done?
I left my son when he was only 6 months old.
Hai Kiki! Hari-hari ibu doa kakak. Ya Allah, jadikanlah di akhir hidup aku dengan aku kat sini. Hari-hari.
Join local companions for lunch in Indonesia's largest city.
Warung makan di Jakarta tuh kita bisa temukan semua daerah.
From a delivery rider who gets hearty meals on a budget.
Warteg ini menyediakan makanan yang murah meriah, bikin kenyang kita tapi bergizi.
To the young and trendy who will line up for their favorite desserts.
Ini unik banget karena kita pesannya lewat kayak mesin ATM.
Lunch with us. Sunday on CNA.
It feels so forbidding.
Tucked away in Singapore's former Supreme Court.
This was one of the most dramatic murder trials ever to take place.
This painting actually changed the destiny of Singapore.
Uncover the untold stories that laid the groundwork for Singapore's nationhood. Hidden Histories, Sunday on CNA. With the uncertainties of the financial world, where does our economy truly stand? Keep up to date with the latest market trends and get the in-depth analysis that you need to understand the forces driving the global economies. Stay informed on the developments of the business world. Asia Business on Asia Tonight, weeknights on CNA. This segment is brought to you by Standard Chartered Priority Banking.
Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia Tonight. It is a stark reversal in financial markets with strong gains in stocks accompanying U.S. President Trump's about turn on trade policy. And here to tell us all about it, Roland Lim.
Thanks, Natalie. It's a sea of green across East Asia, with Chinese markets even brushing off the steepest U.S. levies on Chinese goods in more than 100 years. Now, Taiwan's stocks ended the day 9.3% higher, marking its best rise on record after Monday's 9.7% drop represented its worst drop ever. The gain would likely be a relief for Taiwan's securities regulator. It will be deciding on Saturday whether to extend curbs on short selling that were imposed this week to manage potential turmoil following Mr. Trump's tariffs. TSMC and MediaTek were some of the standout performers on the market, alongside Apple's supplier Hon Precision. Japan's Nikkei 225 ended with its second biggest point gain in history. Now, the index added more than 2,800 points after the close, a day after it saw its biggest single-day rout since the 1987 Black Monday crash. South Korea's Kospi also climbed about 6%, its sharpest rise in more than 5 years. China and Hong Kong shares also ending higher on expectations that Beijing will do more to shield its economy. Leaders are reportedly meeting today to discuss additional stimulus measures. Stocks in Greater China have held up well so far this week, despite the turmoil in global financial markets. The Chinese Central Bank has also been guiding the onshore yuan lower. It's a move widely seen as a way to alleviate tariff impact on the economy. The currency slipped to its weakest level since the global financial crisis, though it did finish slightly firmer from the previous close. The strong performance across Asia echoed the big gains seen in the US markets, but futures are hinting that the relief may be short-lived as they indicate a lower opening later today. Now, after a week of turmoil, President Trump stepped back from his steepest tariffs against U.S. trading partners, except for China, of course. And while his advisors claim it's part of the plan to engage in negotiations, the decision was largely influenced by the upheaval in the U.S. Treasury market. The $29 trillion market is the largest and most liquid in the world and has been described as the bedrock of the global financial crisis. In the past 48 hours, Wall Street traders took to dumping U.S. government debt, raising 30-year borrowing costs to 5%. That's a 2-year high. 30-year yields have surged by the largest amount since 1982, with borrowing costs higher than when Greece had to be bailed out. 10-year yields also climbed from about 3.9% to 4.4% in just a few days. Remember, unlike shares, when investors sell bonds, bond prices fall and yields, i.e. interest rates, go up. And when yields go up, borrowing costs becomes more expensive. The sell-off signaled two things: that market fears inflation, or at least policy-driven instability, and that investors are demanding higher compensation to hold U.S. debt. Now, this raises the cost of funding the U.S. deficit, already a hot-button issue, and with the Fed keeping short-term rates elevated. So it seemed that Trump was fine with the Wall Street sell-off taking a hit, but it didn't want to derail economic stability.
The market is very tricky. I was watching it, but if you look at it now, it's beautiful. The bond market right now is beautiful. But yeah, I saw last night where people were getting a little queasy. I think everything had, well, the big move wasn't what I did today. The big move was what I did on Liberation Day.
When Trump floated broad new tariffs last month, investors grew nervous about high inflation due to rising import prices, slower growth from trade disruptions, and wider deficits if tariffs hurt revenue, but spending continues. It took a while for the bond markets to wake up to the economic and fiscal risks. Up until the 2nd of April, the bond markets played its traditional role as safe haven. And then the bond vigilantes sold down 10-year treasuries. The bond vigilantes is a loose economic term for well-capitalized, large institutional players like hedge, pension, or mutual funds. Domestic and international bondholders who essentially hold IOUs from the U.S. government in return for funding the U.S. trade and capital deficit had sent a message to President Trump: change course or pay the price. And Trump capitulated. But the market may move again, as Mr. Trump has only promised a delay, not a suspension of his reciprocal tariff plans. Merger and acquisition deals are in limbo after President Trump's back-and-forth stance on tariffs. He has now indicated he does not want to see U.S. Steel go to Japan, suggesting a disapproval of Nippon Steel's bid for the American steel producer. And this comes just days after he had ordered a fresh review into Nippon Steel's $14 billion bid, which was earlier blocked by the Biden administration on national security concerns. Shares of Nippon Steel up close to 6% amid the broader market surge. Shares of U.S. Steel fell 10% after the comment in after-hours trade. The future of TikTok in the U.S. also remains uncertain amid the tariff tussle between Washington and Beijing. President Trump has said the potential deal to spin off the U.S. assets of TikTok is still on the table after reports that China would not approve the deal after the fresh tariffs. Trump has extended the deadline for ByteDance to sell its U.S. operations to a non-Chinese buyer until mid-June. He has also suggested that he would consider lowering tariffs on China in exchange for its approval of a TikTok deal.
I would say right now China is not exactly thrilled about signing it. We have a deal with some very good people, some very rich companies that would do a great job with it. But we're going to have to wait to see what's going to happen with China. So
Mr. President, so
no, it's on the table very much. I think China's going to want to do it, actually.
Goldman Sachs has cut its forecast for China's GDP growth for the next 2 years, citing the impact of U.S. tariffs on the world's second-largest economy. The U.S. Investment Bank expects China's GDP to grow 4% this year and 3.5% next year. Both figures down 0.5% from an earlier forecast. The bank published the revised numbers in a report today after the Trump administration hiked tariff rates on China to 125%. Goldman says the tariffs are expected to weigh significantly on the Chinese economy and the labor market, but any additional tariff increase is likely to have a diminishing marginal impact. They add that they anticipate further easing measures by the Chinese government, including a possible policy rate cut of 60 basis points. And that'll do it for Business, Oteli.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, time now for another break, but coming up next on East Asia tonight, China looks to boost economic and trade cooperation with ASEAN in what it says is a joint effort to protect the multilateral trading system. And NATO seeking the next level of cooperation with Japan. We ask an expert how and why the Indo-Pacific matters to the Euro-Atlantic security bloc.
Tensions are escalating between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
We are just responding to the use of force. We are being attacked. What do you expect?
What will conflict cost the two countries?
If Pakistan cannot protect the Chinese, they're right if they leave.
And how did allies turn into adversaries?
We thought that, the Afghan Taliban, they are in a pocket. No, absolutely wrong.
Insight, tonight on CNA. The
ideas, aspirations and attitudes of Singaporeans are changing the nation that raised them.
Passionate Singaporeans living out their very ambitious dreams.
We're looking to write a story of greatness, of extraordinary people impacting communities.
I guess a part of me wanted to connect even deeper with the people.
There's no point playing it safe. Safe will always be forgotten.
If we as Singaporeans are able to have a satellite that we can truly say was conceived, designed, engineered and built in Singapore. Wow, how wonderful would it be?
This is Singapore, we don't give up.
Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we are following. South Korean opposition leader Lee Jae-myung enters the race for president, vowing to address economic inequality, while ex-ruling party head Han Dong-hoon also joins the fray. The election for the nation's top job is set for June 3rd. China has slammed what it calls irresponsible remarks after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed Beijing knows that its nationals are fighting for Russia. And US President Donald Trump has hit pause on higher tariffs from most nations, but not China. Beijing says Washington is destabilizing the global economy, but still hopes to meet America halfway. China is looking to strengthen ties with ASEAN amid trade uncertainty with the US. The bloc's member states were hit by some of the highest tariff rates before the pause. Chinese and Malaysian officials held talks via video conference, agreeing to strengthen bilateral relations and trade cooperation with ASEAN. Beijing says it's willing to address concerns through dialogue and consultation to jointly safeguard the multilateral trading system. Malaysia, the current ASEAN chair, is set to host Chinese President Xi Jinping next week for 3 days. Officials say the visit is part of the government's efforts to seek better trade relations with China and other countries. Well, ASEAN, meantime, says it will not pursue any retaliatory measures against the US for imposing tariffs on regional trade. The bloc's economic ministers posted this statement after holding an online meeting. Well, the member states say they are committed to engaging in a frank and constructive dialogue with Washington. CNA's Afifa Arifin has more.
Initially, of course, at the heart of the talks was how the regional bloc was going to respond to Trump's new tariff regimes, which has slapped up to 49% on goods from several Southeast Asian countries, including 24% tax on Malaysia. But of course, following developments of that tariffs delay, we know that the discussions have evolved. And in a joint statement that was released, said that ASEAN countries will commit not to impose any retaliatory measures in response to the U.S. tariffs, and instead the regional bloc wants to engage in a frank and constructive dialogue with the U.S. on any trade-related concerns. But the Malaysia's Investment, Trade and Industry Ministry had also just released a statement, and in it, it says that ASEAN members and Timor-Leste unanimously refute the basis used in calculations by the U.S. and agreed that the reciprocal tariffs by the U.S., which range from 10% to 49%, will have a profound impact to ASEAN's economic growth and development trajectories. Now, this special meeting, the statement said, also agreed on the establishment of an ASEAN Geo-Economic Task Force, which will serve as a platform for all ASEAN countries to discuss and formulate any coherent strategies moving forward, and that all the positions that were discussed at this meeting today will be presented to the ASEAN leaders at a special ASEAN leaders meeting ahead.
Well, you can also find commentary by U.S. politics expert Stephen Okun on how Trump tariffs could stir more market turmoil via our website, cna.asia. Our NATO chief, Mark Rutte, has wrapped up a 2-day trip to Japan, securing a commitment from Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba to bolster their defense cooperation. Well, the trip by Mr. Rutte is his first to Asia since taking office, part of a NATO push to expand ties in the Indo-Pacific. Well, both leaders met and issued a joint statement yesterday outlining plans for cooperation in cyber defense and maritime security, among other areas. At a joint news conference, the NATO chief also talked about a more dangerous world and named China as a threat.
Meanwhile, China is pursuing a major military build-up and seeks to control key technologies, critical infrastructure and supply chains. It continues to carry out destabilising activities in the Indo-Pacific.
日本 NATO 関係の深化は欧州大西洋とインド太平洋の安全保障が不可分であり、それゆえに地域を超えた安全保障協力の必要性が高まっていることの表れであります。
For more analysis, we are joined now by Kotaro Tamura, adjunct professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS, and he is speaking to us from Tokyo. Well, thanks, Professor, for joining us this evening. Well, Japan and NATO, they are talking about taking their partnership to the next level. So, Professor, what does this actually look like in practical terms?
I think, we share many things. We are now finally waking up. We are kind of asleep. Dependent on U.S. Military power, but the U.S. is trying to be America first and try to keep a distance, at least from Europe. President Trump still seems like treating Japan as a most important country, allies to contain China. But anyway, European and Japan and Asian countries have to do more collaboration to build a muscle to defend ourselves. In the case that U.S. is at least slightly becoming more unpredictable, so we need to share the intelligence, military and civil dual-use technologies that can be military and civil technologies, and also joint exercise potentially. But at the same time, Japan needs to be very careful because, China is not completely Russia. Although China and Russia is strengthening a tie, and also including North Korea. So North Korea missile capability, long-range missiles, is becoming like a global crisis. And Russia is not only the European threat, but at the same time, Asian threat. But China is a complicated relationship. We can't decouple China completely. We cannot provoke China too much, but at least we need to prepare for the worst case scenario. And that's why we are now trying to go to the next level of collaboration between European countries.
Yeah, so you mentioned that, relations with China is complicated. We also see Japan's growing interest in NATO. It seems centered around, trying to counter China. So in other words, how do you think Japan can leverage its position to strengthen NATO's deterrence capabilities?
So we need to, as I mentioned, that you made a great point. We need to be careful. And we need to take a very intricate balance between competition and collaboration with China. But, unpredictability of the Trump is now uniting European countries and us, and sometimes China and us. But as you see, Trump tariff issues, Trump is trying to contain China because of the hegemonic countries try to push down the number 2 hegemonic countries. So in that storyline, I think, Trump will do more to contain China together with us. But at the same time, Mr. Trump's, diplomacy is wake-up call for us and for Europeans. And also, in order to set up stable supply chains, many European countries and companies rely heavily on the Asian supply chains and the Japanese supply chains, and we do the same in Europe. So we need to build, better economic security as well. So not only military, but economic securities. And also, we need to keep a nice distance, not to drive China to the wall, not to provoke unnecessarily, but at the same time, take a balance between Europe, US, and China.
Right. But what is the true cost, though, in terms of whether it's militarily, economically, and diplomatically of this ongoing strategic competition? Because, confronting China is a key focus, right, for both NATO and Japan.
Yes, but, China is not Russia for us. China, and also for ASEAN countries, there are huge diversity among ASEAN countries. The economic linkage, political linkage to China. So it's not the one voice. So, ASEAN countries try to keep the neutrality, no alliance. And at the same time, we need to be very careful, but we need to prepare for the worst case scenario. And we need to exchange more intelligence and military capabilities and technologies with other parts of the world. But, China is already sending the alarm to European countries and NATO that, your way of thinking is very much like a Cold War style. But, provoking China, it's,
But in other words, we are also seeing this emerging trend, as you've mentioned, that Washington, has this flip-flop sort of mentality, that there is this trend where NATO and all the key allies of US, talking about Japan and South Korea, they are sort of seeking greater autonomy from Washington. They're sort of trying to separate themselves from them. And how do you think, what does this mean for regional security then?
So we need to find a new balance. So now everybody said, the world is becoming more dangerous place. Dangerous place means, we are losing center of the gravity. So center of the gravity, we need to find a way. So in order for that, we need to wake up, we need to build up muscle, but at the same time, we need to, keep in touch with China. We need to have a constant communication and at the most, crisis communication with China. So, communication and cooperation and competition, we must do it at the same time. But as you have mentioned, the unpredictability of the U.S. policy, it's sending more threat to us. But China is still big market, important part of us and the ASEAN countries. But at the same time, we need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. So.
That's right.
Very intricate balance.
Everyone's kind of walking a tightrope right now, it seems. Well, thank you so much for your time and thoughts. Kotaro Tamura, adjunct professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, NUS, speaking to us from Tokyo. Well, China, meantime, has slammed what it calls irresponsible remarks after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed that Beijing knows that its nationals are fighting for Russia. Well, Kyiv captured 2 Chinese nationals on a battleground, posting this video purportedly showing one of them. President Zelensky said he is prepared to exchange them for Ukrainian prisoners of war held in Russia. He has accused Russia of recruiting Chinese citizens via social media and believes there are more Chinese nationals involved than the 155 already identified. The Ukrainian leader said he believes that Russia is dragging China into war.
Залучення ще й громадян Китаю у цю війну – це точно розпалення більшої проблеми. І на це потрібно абсолютно принципово реагувати. Посилювати окупаційний контингент і говорити про мир – це взаємовиключні речі. Очікуємо також і на принциповість партнерів, на принциповість в підтримці України.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry, in a news conference today, without naming anyone, told relevant parties to see China's role correctly with a clear head. Earlier, Dr. Alexei Moroviv, Associate Professor of National Security and Strategic Studies at Curtin University, told us that Chinese nationals fighting for Russia isn't entirely new, but it is gaining attention.
I'm actually surprised that we haven't seen them in the media before. And in fact, the Russians were quite open about having the Chinese fighting alongside them for quite some time. I mean, last month, a couple of Russian defense bloggers were actually posting videos showing the Chinese nationals geared up in Russian combat fatigue and fully armed, undertaking some maneuverings in certainly one of the places. There've been evidence or photographic evidence to suggest that China's made military equipment like armored vehicles were utilized by the Russians in the conflict. So again, this is not a groundbreaking news, and certainly it's not groundbreaking from the point of being disseminated by Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky, given the fact that thousands of foreign mercenaries or volunteers have been fighting in Ukraine alongside the Ukrainian regular militaries since the start of the conflict. So we're talking about 150 or so Chinese nationals, if they're all accounted for, fighting on the Russian side, and obviously they won't be the only foreign nationals who would be fighting for Russia. And you have something in the range of 7,000 to 16,000 foreign nationals fighting for Ukraine as part of the so-called Ukraine's Foreign Legion. So it's yet another indication that this regional war has attracted quite a few players that take role in partaking in this conflict in a variety of ways, ranging from providing economic or military aid to effectively sending their citizens. And yes, countries that would send their citizens would obviously do it with a state of denial, obviously not claiming responsibility for having their nationals fighting for either side.
But coming up on East Asia tonight, the US and the Democratic Republic of Congo look to sign a deal for the African nation to trade its minerals in exchange for Washington's military assistance.
Singapore's public housing is among the best in the world. But in recent years,
people would tell me that, HDB flats are unaffordable.
Everything is awful.
The minute we issue the ballot results, we'll be bombarded with a lot of letters saying, why am I unsuccessful?
We get exclusive access to the people at the heart of these closely guarded processes.
Take some photos. Perhaps many of us do not know that actually valuation is the base of setting the prices of HDB new flats.
Yes, we know the trends. We understand the concerns and the feedback.
Is it time to relook the model?
Most of the things they handle are confidential. This will be the first time where it's out in public.
Singapore's public housing revealed. On demand at CNA.Asia.
Saturday on Japan Hour. 地震大国、日本に暮らす宿命。突然やってくる巨大地震から身を守るために、このビルには住友ゴムの制震ダンパー48基が設置されています。
制震構造はその被害を小さくするというような意味がありますから、制震装置が入っていると復旧までの時間が短くなる。
Japan Hour, Saturday on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation. MUFG, committed to empowering a brighter future. Zip Air, winter fares are now available. And IHI.
South Korea's opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, has announced his bid for presidency one day after stepping down from the chairmanship of his party. Now, this will be his second run for president. He lost to Yoon Suk-yeol back in 2022 by the slimmest margin in the country's history. Well, he is currently the front runner in opinion polls to replace Mr. Yoon, who was ousted from office over his brief martial law decree. Mr. Lee led his Liberal Party to a landslide victory in a parliamentary election last year, but he is facing legal problems. The 61-year-old was recently acquitted of violating an election law, but still faces charges of bribery and corruption. The presidential election is scheduled for 3rd of June.
현실적으로 보면 우리가 한미 동맹 매우 중요하고 또 한미일 협력 관계도 매우 중요하죠. 그 속에 일관되는 원칙은 대한민국의 국익이 최우선이다.
Well, on the Conservative side, the field is wide open. The former leader of the ruling People Power Party, Han Dong-hoon, has declared his presidential bid. Mr. Han was seen as a close confidant of Yoon Suk-yeol, but later played a part in the former leader's impeachment.
국민이 먼저인 나라, 성장하는 중산층의 나라, 실용이 이념을 이기는 나라를 만들겠습니다. 오직 그 마음 하나로 정치 교체, 시대 교체, 세대 교체를 이루겠습니다.
A former South Korean president, Yoon Suk-yeol, is expected to leave the presidential residence on Friday after the country's top court upheld his impeachment last week. Reports are saying the Presidential Security Service, the PSS, is organizing a private security team of about 40 people for Yoon. Under the country's current law, he can receive protection from the PSS for up to 10 years, while Yoon is facing a separate criminal trial on charges of insurrection. Beyond East Asia, the United States and the Democratic Republic of Congo have agreed on a way forward on a minerals for security deal. The potential pact could see American companies receiving exclusive rights to DRC's critical minerals in exchange for military assistance to help the Central African country end a decades-long insurgency. Well, CNA correspondent Chris Okamringa reports from the Congolese capital of Kinshasa.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo is home to the planet's largest source of cobalt, but this is a region devastated by war. Much of the recent fighting has been with the Rwandan-backed M23 rebel group. Just this year, it captured swathes of territory in a region that's also rich in lithium, coltan, copper, and uranium deposits. DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi has turned to the US for help, offering access to his country's rare earth minerals in exchange. And US Senior Advisor for Africa, Mossad Bolos, says they're closing in on a deal.
Vous avez entendu parler d'un accord sur les minéraux. Nous avons pris connaissance de la proposition de la RDC et je suis heureux d'annoncer que le président et moi avons convenu d'une voie à suivre pour son élaboration.
The US provided few details, but an earlier proposal offered Washington extraction and export rights to DRC minerals for sectors like defense and technology. Government sources tell me that in return, the US may provide military training, equipment, and possibly deploy boots on the ground, although nothing has been set in stone.
The details are yet to be revealed, and also some of them might not be revealed completely because remember, it's a war. You don't disclose how you're going to play your game to the enemy, otherwise he will, you know what I'm saying. So I think we're yet to understand more. Could involve both sending troops or training, or I don't know, but I know that they will find the right way.
The deal has not yet gone through the Congolese parliament, but officials say it's backed by many lawmakers from the ruling coalition. It's also welcomed by some members of the public, although there are lingering concerns.
Félix a bien fait de traiter avec directement les États-Unis, parce que ce sont les multinationales qui sont derrière les Rwandais et qui fabriquent les groupes armés pour terroriser l'Est de la RDC. Mais le Congo, les Congolais n'aiment pas la paix d'esclaves. Nous voulons la paix, mais ce n'est pas la paix d'esclaves. Il faudra que les États-Unis qui cherchent nos minéraux doivent savoir que les minéraux, c'est patrimoine du peuple congolais. Ce n'est pas patrimoine du gouvernement.
For the US, it's a chance to gain access to DRC's vast critical mineral deposits, but also a means to curb China's influence in the region.
To my opinion, there's not a single country in the world that is not interested in the minerals from DRC.
Today, DRC produces about 70% of the cobalt of the world. DRC is a major producer of copper. For history, the uranium that helped produce the first atomic bomb came from the DRC. So the DRC has always been in the center in terms of minerals. And today we talk about the DRC as the country solution for the world in the transition of the planetary transition in clean energy.
China is currently the dominant player in the DRC's mining sector, but President Tshisekedi wants to diversify access. Some analysts fear that a US entry may create tensions with China.
Il faut donner aux Américains les concessions qui sont vides. Là où il n'y a pas de... que ce soit chinois ou quelqu'un d'autre. Mais il faut leur donner les concessions vides, prêtes à être exploitées. Il ne faut pas donner aux Américains les concessions qui vont les amener dans les combats judiciaires.
There are other challenges beyond the potential US-China competition. Decades of political instability and armed conflicts in eastern DRC have weakened state institutions and given rise to corrupt business dealings, and that may cause the US some pause. But with fighting in eastern DRC escalating, the clock is ticking.
The DRC president is under a lot of pressure to end the armed conflict in the east of his country because of the negative impact it has had on the economy. A UN investigation found that the M23 rebels collect $800,000 US monthly from taxes imposed in mining areas under their control. With few options of getting external assistance left, the Congolese leader believes the US is the country's best bet and is banking on his minerals for security deal to help end the war and stabilize the region. Chris Ochamringa, CNA, Kinshasa.
And that wraps up East Asia tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can always find us on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.